This is Carolina Ghost Towns, a podcast about the vanished towns and lost communities in South Carolina, North Carolina, and maybe a few other places. I'm your host, Tom Taylor. Towns spring up for a variety of reasons. They pop up along transportation routes, such as natural harbors, along rivers, at railroad junctions, and at crossroads. They spring up around resources, like Auraria in a recent episode and its gold rush, or Ferguson at its logging center. Sometimes a town forms around a manufacturing center. Again, Ferguson is a good example with the Santee Cypress Lumber Company, or the Henry River Mill Village from another recent episode. Sometimes a town will arise for no good reason other than the fact that there isn't another one nearby, and the area's rural residents just need a place for a post office and a couple of stores where they can get their goods. Today's town came into being for none of those reasons. It was created purely for spite by one ambitious man. Yet, this town rose to prominence as one of the major cities in South Carolina along the Savannah River. It also became one of the first railroad destinations in the United States. Sadly, it died out in tragedy and was replaced by another town with a completely different name. Today's town is Hamburg, located across the river from Augusta, Georgia. Klaus Heinrich Klahn was born in Germany in 1776. He was a successful trader until the Napoleonic Wars. After that, he fell deeply into debt and stowed away aboard a ship anchored in Hamburg, bound for America. Once in the New World, Klahn changed his name, using an Americanized version of his middle name and taking on the surname Schulz. By 1806, the newly christened Henry Schulz found work operating a pole boat that plied between Augusta and Savannah. 3 years later, he had earned enough to purchase his own boat. In 1814, with the help of engineer Lewis Cooper, Schulz built a bridge across the Savannah River from Augusta to the South Carolina side. Schulz operated the new bridge as a toll bridge, charging fees for pigs, cows, carts, and people. By 1819, income from Schulz's bridge came to around $85,000. Yet, that wasn't enough. Schulz formed the Bridge Company of Augusta and issued his own currency through his bridge bank, known as, quote, bridge bills, close quote. During the economic panic of 1819, the bridge company and bank failed, and Schulz's bridge bills were worthless. The city of Augusta foreclosed on the bridge, taking ownership of it. Schulz was outraged. He conspired with landowners on the South Carolina side of the Savannah River to build a new town that would usurp Augusta's dominance. In 1821, the town of Hamburg was chartered, named for the city in Germany where Schulz left for America. Schulz's plan was that Hamburg would draw off trade from South Carolina. Cotton was brought in from Edgefield County in the Carolina interior and loaded onto boats at Hamburg without having to pay tolls on the bridge that had once belonged to Schulz. In local papers, Schulz praised his new town while casting aspersions upon Augusta. The state of South Carolina was complicit in Schulz's scheme. They wanted to direct trade from Augusta and Savannah in Georgia toward Hamburg. In 1821, the state approved $50,000 loan to Schulz and gave tax-free exemptions to those that bought lots in the new town. The state also established a tobacco inspection barn in Hamburg. Dry goods vendors and other merchants set up shop and began to advertise in the Charleston and Edgefield newspapers. The real coup came in 1833, when regular rail service was established between Charleston and Hamburg. The South Carolina Canal and Railway Company set up the first regular passenger service in the United States, and Hamburg was right in the middle of things. Letters to the local papers sang the praises of Henry Schulz and envisioned a direct line of trade between Schulz's Hamburg and the original town of Hamburg in Germany.
The enterprising spirit of Henry Schulz, ever teeming with plans of public usefulness, has projected a scheme of direct intercourse between the flourishing town which he has founded on the southern border of this state and the great commercial emporium bearing the same name in Europe. The reputation which Mr. Schulz has already earned for enlightened forecast and an indefatigable perseverance in the consummation of his plans.
Whereas Henry Schulz, the founder of the town of Hamburg in the state, has projected a plan for opening a direct commerce between Hamburg in Europe and Hamburg in America, has requested me as the Governor and Commander-in-Chief of the state of South Carolina to certify such facts. Now therefore I do hereby make known to all whom it may concern that the aforesaid Henry Schulz is, in my opinion, eminently distinguished for enterprise, sagacity, perseverance, and public spirit.
The funny thing about spite is that it rarely satisfies. Despite the apparent success of Hamburg, Schulz still found himself in and out of trouble, both financial and otherwise. He kept an ongoing battle in the courts with appeals to resolve the issue of his long-lost bridge. He declared bankruptcy several times due to legal expenses and the debts accrued while building his town. He even served some time in prison in Edgefield for manslaughter for the accidental death of a worker. At one point, he even attempted suicide. Schulz resorted to selling off properties in order to pay off some of his debts. This is how he started one of his ads to sell off some of his land.
Having passed the meridian of human life and being in a feeble state of health, I am serious to wind up the several attempts of my successful enterprises and settle up myself, finally, all the just demands due by me to mankind, instead of leaving it of others to do it for me after I have ceased to be.
The ad goes on to describe the properties for sale. Henry Schulz didn't live to see the ultimate decline of his town formed by spite. He died in 1851, still deeply in debt. Legend has it that he was buried upright, facing away from Augusta. His business partners tried to wrest control of the bridge from Augusta by erecting a toll gate. Augusta responded by destroying the toll gate with cannon fire, then threatened to turn the cannons on the town of Hamburg itself. The courts ultimately settled in Schulz's favor regarding fees from his former bridge, but by then it was too late. Apart from firing cannons on a neighboring state, Augusta had its own plans for dealing with the bridge. In 1845, it completed the Augusta Canal, which greatly aided navigation on the Savannah River on the Georgia side. However, the ultimate blow to Hamburg was the construction of a new railroad bridge from Hamburg to Augusta in 1853, relegating Hamburg to just a rail stop on the line, rather than a terminal junction. Hamburg quickly began to decline as business moved across the river. But that's not the end of Hamburg's story. Some of this next section is directly quoted from the African American history website blackpast.org. The website describes the events of 1876 more concisely than I could. I'll link to the site in the show notes. These quotes are interspersed with my own, but I want to make sure that the original is cited. By the time of the Civil War, hardly any residents or businesses were left in the town of Hamburg. After the Civil War, Hamburg took on new life, this time as a freedmen's town. Local newspapers lamented the, quote, Africanization, close quote, of the former town. The county of Aiken was the only county in South Carolina formed during Reconstruction, and Hamburg was a refuge for former slaves. In 1876, the Hamburg Company militia, made up of newly freed slaves, was practicing for an Independence Day parade on July 4th. Two white farmers, Thomas Butler and Henry Getson from Edgefield County, attempted to drive a carriage through the parade in a blatant attempt at provocation. They were initially blocked, but then allowed through. On July 6, the two farmers appeared before Judge Prince Rivers, the black magistrate of Hamburg, to submit a complaint about the militia blocking a public road. Matthew C. Butler, an Edgefield attorney, appeared as the farmers' counsel. Butler demanded that the Hamburg Militia Company be disbanded, although that action had no direct connection to the complaint. Rivers delayed the hearing for 2 days, which gave enough time for Ben Tillman's Red Shirts to organize and march from the town. By this point, hundreds of armed white men, including many who were members of various rifle clubs, descended upon the small black community. Militia members retreated to the Sibley Building, a stone warehouse which they used as their armory. Sometime during the afternoon of July 8th, a battle ensued. Surrounded and outnumbered, 25 militiamen and 15 Hamburg residents fought back from the armory. By mid-afternoon, a white attacker and a militiaman lay dead, and a few more members of the militia were wounded. A cannon was brought over from nearby Augusta and aimed at the armory. As cannon fire blew a hole in the armory, some black militiamen and Hamburg's town marshal, James Cook, attempted to flee. Cook was shot and killed. The rest of the militiamen and townspeople were captured in the armory. The white supremacist militia rounded up about 24 black citizens, some from the militia, and at about 2 a.m. took them to a spot near the South Carolina Railroad and Bridge. There, the whites formed what was later called the Dead Ring and debated the fate of the black men. The whites picked out 4 men and, going around the ring, murdered them one at a time. These men were as follows: Allen Attaway, David Phillips, Hampton Stevens, and Albert Mineyart. The rest were allowed to escape, though as soon as they began to flee, the whites trained their guns on the escaping men, shooting as many as possible. Moses Parks was killed while trying to escape, and others were wounded. 7 men died that afternoon. 6 black militiamen or civilians, and 1 white farmer, Thomas Merriweather. Charges were brought against 87 white participants in the massacre, including Ben Tillman and the attorney Matthew Butler. However, after the election of 1876, when Wade Hampton was elected governor, none of the men were brought to trial. As we saw in a recent episode about the community of Phoenix in Greenwood County, one group's riot is another's massacre. The Phoenix incident has become known historically as the Phoenix Riot, but the Hamburg tragedy is always rightly referred to as a massacre. Regarding the Hamburg incident, Tillman is quoted in a 1909 address during a Red Shirt reunion in Anderson as saying, quote, "The leading white men of Edgefield had decided to seize the first opportunity that the Negroes might offer them to provoke a riot and teach the Negroes a lesson," close quote. Tillman further described the events of the day as, quote, "having the whites demonstrate their superiority by killing as many of them as was justifiable," close quote. To add further insult to injury, the one white farmer killed in the incident, Thomas Merriweather, has a large monument in North Augusta. The tall obelisk has an inscription that says that Merriweather was a, quote, "young hero who gave his life maintaining those civic and social institutions which the men and women of this race had struggled through the centuries to establish in South Carolina," close quote. It further added, quote, "he exemplified the highest ideal of Anglo-Saxon civilization. By his death he assured the supremacy of that ideal," close quote. None of the black citizens murdered during the fray were mentioned on the marker. It wasn't until recently that the African American victims of the massacre were recognized by a historical marker. In 2016, a small historical marker was placed in the nearby community of Carsville, commemorating those deaths, including Meriwether's. Following the Hamburg massacre, the town began to decline even further. In 1892, the Atlanta Journal reported that, quote, "they want to wipe out Hamburg," close quote.
In the House today, Mr. Woodward of Aiken introduced a bill to repeal the act of incorporating the town of Hamburg, just this side of the Savannah River and known as North Augusta. This is in line with the recommendation in the governor's message, the reason being the numerous disorders and drunken rackets that frequently occur there on Sundays. The town was chartered in 1827, and before the war, it did an immense business.
Augusta built levees along the banks of the Savannah River, but the Hamburg side was left unprotected. Devastating floods in the 1920s wiped out most of what was left of Hamburg. The remaining African American residents moved to higher ground along the Savannah Bluffs and formed the community of Carsville. By 1930, Henry Schulz's former town site was largely abandoned. Hamburg's location along the Savannah had become irrelevant as Augusta made improvements in rail and river travel. However, the higher land along the river's bluffs was still attractive. As Hamburg died out, North Augusta was beginning to take root and grow. In 1890, two brothers, James and Walter Jackson, formed the North Augusta Land Company. Their holdings eventually came to 6,500 acres. On that property, they built the Hampton Terrace Hotel. The hotel had a panoramic view of Augusta and the Savannah River. The grounds contained an 18-hole golf course, a ballroom, fine dining hall, luxurious accommodations, sitting areas, gardens, walking trails, tennis courts, horseback riding, tea rooms, men's lodge, hunting club, and a natatorium swimming facility. The hotel burned on New Year's Eve in 1916, apparently due to faulty wiring and ill-fitting fire hydrants. Prior to its destruction, the Hampton Terrace attracted famous celebrities as winter visitors, with guests including U.S. President William Howard Taft, Chicago store owner Marshall Field, Pullman Car Company President Robert Todd Lincoln, son of President Abraham Lincoln, stage and movie actress Billie Burke, who played Glinda the Good Witch of the North in The Wizard of Oz, Mrs. General George Armstrong Custer, and John D. Rockefeller. The city of North Augusta was incorporated in 1906. Eventually, the city grew to encompass all of the area along the banks of the Savannah across from Augusta, including the former town of Hamburg. Today, modern North Augusta is a thriving city. There are very few remnants of Henry Schulz's town of Hamburg to be found in the bustling city of North Augusta. Apart from the aforementioned monuments, the 5th Street Bridge roughly follows the route of Schulz's original bridge. In the river are concrete abutments and supports for an older bridge, probably a previous automobile bridge, but probably not Schulz's bridge. In a subdivision just south of 5th Street are the remains of the old W.J. Rutherford and Company brickyard. This company actually came very late in Hamburg's life and wasn't really part of Schulz's old town. On private property nearby is a small wooden depot with the words Hamburg, South Carolina on the side. A plaque on the side of the depot designates the Charleston Hamburg Railroad as a National Historic Civil Engineering Landmark. One last note. The black magistrate in Hamburg during the massacre was a man by the name of Prince Rivers. He was well educated and led an amazing life despite slavery and other adversity. He was a legislator, trial judge, and one of the founders of Aiken County. His life would make an excellent podcast episode all on its own. I will link to more information about Prince Rivers in the show notes. And that's it for today's episode. I used multiple resources for this episode, and I'll try to link to as many of them as I can in the show notes. Once again, thanks for listening, and be sure to tell your friends about the podcast.
In this southern ghost town, we found a story untold. In the shadows of the past, we unravel, secrets unfold. With each step we take, we journey back in time. In this southern ghost town, we leave our footprints behind.
Thanks for listening. The opening music was composed by Lex FM with additional music from Pixabay. The song Southern Ghost Town was generated by Suno AI. All other music was composed and recorded by me, Tom Taylor. Carolina Ghost Towns is a part of the Random Connections empire. It's pretty much a one-man show, so I wear all the hats, including producer, writer, researcher, sound engineer, publicist, and bartender. If you like the show, please subscribe on your favorite pod venue and be sure to give us feedback. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for the show, you can reach me at carolinaghosttownspod@gmail.com. For more information and show notes, visit randomconnections.com. Thank you.
In this southern ghost town, we found a story untold. In the shadows of the past, we unravel, secrets unfold. With each step we take, we journey back in time. In this southern ghost town, we leave our footprints behind.